Hello, all, and welcome to that InboxArmy podcast. I'm your host, Scott Cohen. With me, as always, is my co-host, Garin Hobbs. Garin, how's it going today?
Not too bad. Always beautiful on a Friday, Scott.
Absolutely. I love doing these on Fridays. All right, today we're going to be addressing one of the elephants in the room. There's so much talk about personalization, dynamic content, AI, you name it, but people often forget about the important infrastructure, the foundational work that needs to be completed prior to all of this stuff happening. So we went out like we always do and got somebody a hell of a lot smarter than me to talk about this stuff. Joining us today is Brian Riback, founder of Labrador, a consultancy specializing in empowering small businesses through strategic MarTech alignment, process optimization, and training. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I've been so excited for this since we talked about it. So this is going to be great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. But before we get into the weeds, I love to learn a little bit about people's journeys. So how they ended up where they are now. Tell us about your journey to Labrador.
Sure. So I started my career right before there was something called Google that you might have heard of, right? And there were a lot of opportunities for me to actually do some personalization with respect to ad placement on a website for a radio station I worked at called Z100 in New York. But there was no ad placement. There was no trafficking. It was basically going to my boss and saying, do you mind if I sell this? And she says, sure. And without realizing it, I was starting to develop a deep interest in putting the right thing at the right place at the right time. And, as I progressed and email marketing became a thing, I started to get deeply interested in that after working for Avis and Budget Car Rental, where I was responsible for sales retention or rental retention year over year for business programs and all these different things, and looking at the behavioral patterns and whatnot. And I got a job working at Cheetah Mail, which is now, I think, Experian Cheetah Mail. Now it's back to Cheetah Mail, whatever, but it was the original Cheetah Mail.
A lot of changes there.
Oh, absolutely. And I became just infatuated with Frederick Lindbergh, who at the time was the CTO. He's just so brilliant, and his approach to segmentation and whatnot was so ahead of its time. And from that point, I just kind of fell into a lot of different types of work where I had this job title of email marketer, and that was like 1/10 of what I actually did. Because I've always believed that email cannot succeed in a silo, right? It's only as good as everything that empowers it. And so I wanted to get not just beyond being a generalist, just beyond it, because I don't think you could be an expert in everything, but just beyond it, and started to feel this really deep interest in both marketing and technology and what makes them work together. And then all of a sudden, Scott Brinker comes out with the term MarTech and Chief MarTech and all these things. And I said, yeah, this is me. This is what I want to do. Except it really isn't 100% of what I want to do, because although I take a responsibility for MarTech optimization, to me, that's the second step or third step, right? For me, I care more about the people who have to use it every day and whether they're empowered to use it. And that's where I decided to come up with the concept of Labrador, because what I focus on with Labrador is problem prevention. Everyone's out there solving problems. I prevent them from occurring in the first place. And the number one way I do that is by drawing a line in the sand between empowerment and enablement. I can enable you to do anything. You might not know how to do it, but you can, technically, there it is. Empowerment makes sure that your teams can do it, that they have the tools, the concessions, like custom dashboards or whatnot, to be able to do it. And when I talk with clients or leads, it really intrigues them. And what blows me away every time without reservation is the look on their faces when they're like, wait, hold on, you're actually going to care about me? In an inferred sense. And it's just wonderful, because I'm not going to give them more tech that they won't know how to use or benefit from. And now I'm doing exactly what I love to do.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's I like you said, like, just above a generalist. I call that knowing enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
Which I feel like, particularly like email code and stuff like that, I like to say I know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
You don't want me to start from scratch, but I could edit pretty well. It's been a few years, so I probably can't even do that anymore. I'm probably blowing smoke, but let's be fair. But yeah, so when we talk about personalization, we like to say, Garin, I think you've said it before, if you ask 5 different people to define it, you'll get 5 somewhat different answers, right? But before we dive into how it's, that empowerment and enablement piece, what does effective personalization look like in 2024?
Well, whenever I work on a new project, the first thing I do is agree to a common lexicon. So in other words, what I might define something as, I don't care. What are we calling it for the sake of this project? Right? And let's come to an agreement on what we're talking about there. Because I have the Frederick Lindbergh version of personalization, which I stand by as being the standard, because the guy half invented it from my perspective, from a data perspective. And when I think about personalization, what I'm focused on is the experience of having a personalized reference to somebody in an email or in anything, right? So the personalization is a category. It is not a verb. It is not an action. It is a category. And when we look at it that way, I think it actually takes some of the intimidation away. But at the same time, the powers that be at all the ESPs that are out there, I think, have dug their own hole in trying to create the false perception that it's so easy to do. It's so easy, and again, that's enablement versus empowerment. But that is where the honed separation really is for me. To answer your question, I think I did.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, you've just really reinforced the fact that it is subjective. So having that common ground is, hypercritical to making sure that everyone's on the same page. And being on the same page begins with that, common thread of shared language. So I think that's an excellent place to start that most people don't really think of. It's hard to imagine an industry more fraught with subjectivity than email. So I love that you're kind of just lancing that right off the start.
It's funny.
So,
my wife makes fun of me all the time because I very much get lost in semantics, but I don't think they're semantics because I have seen them substantively matter.
They matter. That difference definitely makes all the difference in the world. So anytime I think about things like personalization, it seems strange, but it always evokes for me the story of the little red hen, right? Everybody always wants to focus on sort of the end product. Everyone wants to eat the bread, but very few people think about all the things that are necessary going into it. Who will help me plant it? Who will help me harvest it, grind it, etc. So to power all of this personalization and reach this, nirvana of individualized experience, what do companies really need to have in place? What resources, infrastructure, etc.?
Well, I think you actually said the first step. They actually have to have common sense. It's like someone asking me to go to 2 Main Street and cook a meal for a family of 10, and I go to 2 Main Street and there's no house built yet. It's just, you have to appreciate that. Yes, personalization can drastically improve engagement and conversion rates. Absolutely no question. That's absolutely true if it's done correctly. But let's define correctly, right? If you include someone's first name in a subject line, statistically speaking, if we could speak in generalities, because I don't like saying industry average, what nonsense. But if we agree that putting first name in a subject line does improve open rates, just for the sake of this conversation, right? Good. Okay, start with that. But make sure you don't have curse words and, cities that accidentally made it into the first name field because somebody used too many commas when they built the database out and it confused the platform. And the more these companies move forward with bad habit after bad habit, they're digging themselves into a deeper hole. So as soon as you start adding on more of the complexities of personalization, you're damning yourself for the future, because then when you try to employ something, you think you're employing it right, but you're not. So the first step is having common sense and say, okay, what's realistic based on my team? What's realistic based on my database size, right? So my first question I ask when somebody wants to do personalization is, how large is your database? Oh, we got 50,000 people. No. When I say database, again, lexicon, I mean active people. So show me how many people have opened an email or engaged with an email. Thanks to Apple, we can't just use opens. Engaged with an email at least once in the last 90 days, but they've been sent at least 3 emails. First, a lot of the ESPs today, you can't actually build that query because they treat profile data and campaign data as separate, and they don't have time series databases. So because they want to save money, so they don't know the last 3, or the last 10, the last whatever. And to me, that's problematic, but a conversation for another day. But what happens is they run the query if they can. That 50,000 person database is knocked down to 9,000 people. And then the conversation 9 times out of 10 actually goes away for personalization and goes towards an acquisition strategy, because then I start looking at the rate of attrition, which is unfortunately called churn, which it isn't churn. Churn is based on paid something, no longer paying for it. But, so engagement attrition, no longer engaging with the content, that's what I care about. That's number one. So it sounds silly, but once it's explained to you, there's a little more context. You never want to call somebody's baby ugly. But when you could get to the point where you look at someone and say, look, you brought me here for personalization. I understand that. And if you want to stop the conversation here, that's fine. But the truth in the matter is you have an acquisition problem because you don't actually have an acquisition strategy. You're coasting along and you're losing 15 to 20% of your database every month. You need to be gaining that times 20 or 30% or whatever in order to start worrying about anything. You have to get your house in order. And that's what a really big part of it comes down to. Then there's strict organization. There's people understanding the difference between a segment, an audience, a tag, or whatever. The ESPs have not done us a favor there either. They all apply the terms differently. In some cases, they're the same thing. They don't really have a seeming difference, and so
just how they name automations, right? Automations, journeys, streams, flows. I mean, it's all the same thing. Yeah.
It's when you have marketing people naming things that operations people should be naming. But but I think that's that's part of it too, because the other aspect of personalization is that it requires a highly organized approach. Very, it's like you need a librarian involved to help you create your indexing of just assets, just assets, and then so if we start to think about personalization, okay, we go back to our friends that have 9,000 people in a database. Okay, no problem. With 9,000 people in your database, I'm going to let you do first name, dear first name, whatever. And at 9,000 people, it's not hard for me to put together a Python query and just say, look for these curse words or look for invalid characters, look for this, look for that. And then, unfortunately, more times than I wish it to be true, when I look at the results, it's just unusable. So now, do I want to go and really invest money or time to figure out the first names for these people? Or do I say to myself, these people, yes, they engage with content, but no, they haven't bought anything. And they're reading this content, but otherwise don't engage with my brand. Are they really worth investing into? I mean, maybe to sell something, but again, they're not buying anything from you. So in my mind, it always comes back to ROI. So if your net revenue is not going to be increased as a result of your efforts, it's not worth doing. And people say, well, personalization doesn't really cost much. It's natively available. It does cost much, because the risk of sending an email to somebody and it says, dear kitten, or dear blank bad word, there's an opportunity cost, and you don't need that in your lives, especially in a B2B world. So I could take this further, but I don't know if you want to cut me off with something.
I think it's amazing. We always talk about the positives, right? The net positives that you can see there. I like that you talked about the risks, right? Like everything has to be done right. And then you have to, I mean, the number of times that I ran into when I was brand side of some people did all caps, some people did all lowercase. Are you going to have to put in the little, the code to do the whole, make sure it all is formatted the same way. And what if they mistyped their name, but they didn't realize they mistyped their name? what if the cat walked on the keyboard? I mean, there's a lot of little things there that it's the risk reward, right? And you could argue that, I mean, at a 9,000 person list, I always say the test has to be big enough that one person can't change the results, right? I mean, if one person acts differently, you go, oh, they won. It's like, well, one guy did something different.
Representative sampling.
Yes.
It's funny. I worked on one database for a publisher in New York. Their database was 2.5 million people. So, okay, now we're talking about some good numbers, right? 2.5 million people. And they wanted to do a direct mail piece. And, I did some CAS certification. So I knew that, the addresses that were valid were indeed valid. Okay, those were postal addresses. Life is so much easier. So no problem. It's great. But I said to myself, I wonder how many of these people have incomplete addresses, right? And so I had the data science team do some querying, and the amount of people where they had the street address, city, state, but no zip. And why is there no zip? Johnny or whatever who used to work here, he couldn't forget how to get the leading 0 on the New Jersey and Connecticut zip codes to not be removed in the database. So he just removed the zip codes. And so,
been there.
Occam's razor.
Yeah, Alex. I mean, it was so silly. And so, what did it take them? A half hour using the post office's API to append, the zip code, and all of a sudden, I mean, we had like, in the tens of thousands of more addresses that we were able to send to. And, so it goes to your point, Scott, in a way, which is if I want to have a representative sample, I need as many people as I can that I know are valid,
Yeah. And how many of those people have moved?
Well, that's the funny part. So
well, then you just go, it becomes acquisition and reactivation.
It is, except again, it's postal addresses in New York. And Sandy hit, Hurricane Sandy.
Oh.
How many of those addresses no longer existed?
Yeah.
There's no official record of that. It was hard. It was a hard time.
I worked at a company where the people that had not ordered in a really long time, we called them the dead file. Yeah. And we would joke that some of them might actually be dead. So what do we do with them? Without asking.
I get that. Hey, that's a publication used to sell ads for cemeteries, so I get it. I'm with you.
At least that's the appropriate audience for that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Brian, something you said a few minutes ago really kind of stuck with me, and I love the way you phrased it. A personalization, it's not a thing, it's a category, right? It's not a verb, it's not a singularity, it's a category. And it strikes me there's a very broad spectrum, within that category. Everything on the low side from hi, Brian, to hi, Brian, you look really great stepping out for work in your blue shirt today. Here's some khakis that would go well for that, or go well with that, right?
Nice.
What do you see as the dividing line between effective personalization and just plain creepy? I love hearing these types of, personalization horror stories. You have anything like that you might share? Or at the very least, where do you see that dividing line?
One of the things that baffles me in our industry are the steps a company will take to do anything but ask their customers a question. It's unbelievable. They will go through steps, and they will purchase data, and they're going to go to like saleswhatever.com, and they're going to find out their new company that they don't work at the old. They go through all of these steps, and I'm just like, pick up a phone, send an email, not a HTML marketing email, send an email from customer service. Say, John, hey, Susie, what is so hard about that? But we don't do it. And so we shoot ourselves in the foot with this kind of big brother, approach. And so under the umbrella of personalization, using literal terms, we could all name them whatever we want, the four corners of the earth, but you have rules-based, RULES, rules-based, and non-rules-based personalization. That's the two. That's the only two. Okay, non-rules-based is Dear John, Dear Cindy, or putting your city or something in an email or whatever. If your data is healthy enough and you're confident in it, have at it. It's certainly not going to hurt. It will have some benefit. I mean, if it's that or nothing, do it. Just make sure your data is ready. The other is rule-based. And rule-based is to say there's a term called predefined segments. And those predefined segments are a tool that are not used enough in our industry anymore, because they lead to something called a derived segment, or derived database value, I should say. And let me take a step back and I'll timeline it for you to show you how it works. The first step is we want women in New Jersey, ages 35 to 49, who have an income of this, and they add 5 more parameters, right? When you leave non-data scientists or non-developers to build that segment, you're just creating an opportunity for disaster, because the Boolean logic is not something everybody knows. It's just true, you know. And I don't know how to give someone a pedicure. I don't know, you know. So we don't all know everything. So what I'm saying is that you create a predefined segment in that's something you run on the back end, right? Because we know that that's a core audience for us, if it's client side or client, you know. And then what we do is we create a derived segment. So when I go to build this, when that person who works on the team goes to build a segment, all they have to do is, audience preference equals T, or female gold level equals T, F. Every field in your database, other than the ones that would be used for content placement, like first name and last name, should be brought down to the binary level whenever possible. So you have the predefined segments built on the back end, and the derived segments are the ones that segments are built out of. When you start to do that, you have to be careful, because if you put in there that the city is, Jersey City, you can't then have the person go in and put in, city equals Dallas. It's not going to work. So you have to be very careful in how you do it. But this goes back to our point from before. It's not easy to do this stuff. It might be easy to use it when it's set up correctly, but it is not easy to do this stuff. You have to appreciate the complexities built into that, because then there's the step further. The step further there is it a static or a variable template, or dynamic template, I should say? Well, not template, segment. Is it a static or dynamic segment, right? We count this people. This is the group of people. It's never going to change. This is my list of deli owners, right? Or it's dynamic, where it's deli owners who, live in these 5 zip codes. Now deli owner 3 moves and is no longer in that zip code. They need to fall out of that segment. So that's a dynamic segment. And why I'm explaining all these different pieces, because everything I just said falls under behavioral or rules-based segmentation. If you go back to where I started, I said non-rules-based segmentation is, if your data is healthy, you want to use first name, have at it. Simple. Yeah. It is. But you want to do behavioral-based dynamic content, you want to see that needle move. It's just not an easy thing to do. And you need a data scientist, maybe not as a permanent fixture, but certainly up front. And you need to have somebody, an old codger like me, come in and be able to help establish the logic. The way these ESPs and companies are building out journeys and this and that is not correct. All they're doing is sending out emails on a timer. No matter what the trigger is or this or that, it's baseless. And it's not scientific. And I don't mean to speak in absolutes. I certainly don't mean it that way. I don't mean like every company on earth. But I do think the great majority of them are that can't afford data scientists. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
It does.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. It's the data infrastructure. I mean, it's a garbage in, garbage out thing, right? So, I mean, I've done, I've been in a CDP selection, and then, CDPs are only as good as the garbage you put in.
Yeah.
That they won't spit anything out that's good for you if you don't get that proper, right? You don't.
Yeah.
And it's also, are you collecting the data you intend to use? And that's where like creepiness can come in. It's like you're collecting data that you think is cute, and you might do these little notes there. Is it useful? Probably not.
But
it's
Scott,
yeah,
here's the thing. There's so many
yeah.
levels to what you just said. First of all, is the person analyzing the data have any idea what they're looking at? Right?
Yep.
Is there anyone there that's going to know how to use the CDP? Is there enough data, valid data?
Yep.
I have never come across a client other than enterprise level that asks for a CDP where I didn't say, you don't need a CDP. At the very least, you're not designed or set up to have one.
Right. Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, in my view, focus group of one here, CDPs are great if you're doing all channels.
Yeah.
If you're just focused on email, I don't think you need a CDP.
Well,
the
the impression is we want it for data visualization. And I go, what are you talking about?
None of them. No. It's a pipe. I mean, let's be fair. It's a pipe. But, what's interesting, I think, we talk about this in data collection and data usage. There's this sort of dichotomy of privacy versus data collection. And we're in this world where people expect high levels of personalization and think you already have the data. And in some cases, people do. But then this expectation of privacy, and of course, the ever building privacy legislation, the US is behind the rest of the world, let's be fair, and likely always will be because there's too much money involved. But how do you reconcile the two camps?
It's actually a very simple concept. It's the same answers when people ask me, how do you protect deliverability, right? When GDPR came down, everybody was so scared. I wasn't scared. None of that stuff scares me now. Why? Because I don't send emails to people that don't want to hear from me. So if I don't send emails to people that don't want to hear from me, I don't have a thing to worry about. And I think it's very true with this too, data privacy and whatnot. If you know that Old Navy asked you your preference of t-shirt size or color, or they know that you're male, because you subscribe or you registered for their credit card or their loyalty club or whatever thing they want to call it. It's not loyalty, but whatever. You're not surprised that they know it. And at the same time, you're actually happy because, I actually like my Kohl's emails. I like them because I get to see when there's a really good sale on something, everything like that. I would not like them if they're sending me stuff for women. I have this problem with YouTube. YouTube thinks I'm a 60-year-old overweight woman who, for some reason, can't figure out what bra to wear. I mean, that's what I'm living with. It's crazy.
I had a similar experience with a very well-known sort of upscale clothing retailer. Very often I will buy things for my wife, right? Which is an out-of-category purchase for me since most of my other purchases are strictly men's clothes. So to your earlier point, rather than asking me the question to understand the context, they simply start marketing women's clothes to me. Here are items you will like. Where if they had simply identified it as an out-of-category purchase and then asked me the question, it would now be, here are other items she will like, which puts me in the mindset of buying for others rather than feeling this irrelevant connection of buying stuff for myself.
That is such a missed opportunity, man. I see it all the time. I saw it when Victoria's Secret was my client. I see it now. It is ridiculous. Take note of that once a year, the husband buys something. This brought me back to my Avis budget days, right? That next year, it's their birthday. Like the CEO is traveling to a client, same time every year. Upsell them then,
Yeah.
If she liked this last year, she's going to love this year.
And in positioning it as a gift, I think studies show it's 2-3x people spend more on others than they spend on themselves. So if they couch it that way, not only are they getting the relevancy, but I'm likely to open my wallet even wider.
I think the Brian, you mentioned earlier that you don't understand why people don't ask. And I'm not saying this is the right answer. I'm saying the answer is people are terrified because of unsubscribes. We had this conversation. Right. I'm with you. I'm with you. Like, we shouldn't be afraid of that. Like, if they're going to unsubscribe from that, it's because they're out anyway.
All right. Well,
Right.
so
But
go down this lane with me for a second, because I
yeah,
think
of
this is
course.
important. All right. The whole idea of email marketing, even before websites, was built, not the technology, but the philosophies, right? Was built by the same people who managed and sold ads in print media, right? Maybe TV. Okay. So what they did was they applied this familiar philosophy, both because they feared for their jobs and also because they didn't know any better, to the online world. So the same exact things. I mean, if you think about it, right? If you saw an ad in Victoria's Secret on page 42 of the New York Times or something like that, okay, you get an email from, with lingerie on it the second your boss walks by, you go, oh crap. Those things are not equal things, but because everything was built on this singular framework, if that makes sense, it's like that philosophy is what has did down the line. And so as a result of that, sales teams, CEOs, everybody, quality. I tell people all the time, I would rather have 1,200 people totally engaged in my email marketing than a list of 3 million. I would.
Yep. Let them go with gladness in your hearts, right? Those are only going to be the folks who drag down your deliverability, who otherwise pose a risk to 100% inboxing, right? So let them go.
Absolutely. And Scott, I think I cut you off before, and I feel bad that I did. So.
No, I was just saying, like, we had Matt Holman, who runs Subscription Prescription, and we talked about this a lot. Like, people don't want to send out emails going, hey, your next shipment is up, or do you still need stuff? Do you need to pause? Like, they're so afraid of people canceling the subscription that they never mail it, and don't realize the customer value of it, of like, your customer experience improves when you ask questions. Now, you also have to realize your response rate to those are going to be pretty low.
Okay.
So you're really freaking out over a very small percentage of people, but there's that brand equity you build of, hey, can we do better for you? Tell us more. That may not show up in email, but will show up in revenue, right? That sort of indirect brand value down the line.
People that know me are sick of me saying the following, but it's one of those sticky things that it's true. When you're going to send email, you have to answer two fundamental questions, not one or the other. You have to answer both. Why are you sending the email, and why should the recipient care? And those two answers should let you have the solace that, okay, I should send this email. It's if something got rained out and it got canceled, you wouldn't think twice. You'd send an email right away. You wouldn't even think about it. You do it impulsively, but it's not an impulsive thing. It's the right thing to do. It's just not. And wow, do companies miss out on opportunities with that? I see it with like Live Nation, Ticketmaster, and all these other companies that like have. There's so many partnerships that they miss out on, and opportunities they miss out on because they're afraid of sending too many emails. Sending too many emails means sending too many emails without answering those two questions or too many times in one day. It's just true.
You can send as often as you're relevant.
Yep.
There you go. Yeah, the audience will tell you where the limit is, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So, Brian, as a person who's also been involved in personalization strategy for, several years now, I see people approaching it similar to the way that I see people approaching AI right now, right? Hey, it's effective, it's performative, it's going to boost my KPIs without necessarily understanding how they will strategically apply it. And what I see oftentimes is an overinvestment in third-party solutions, additional technology, et cetera. How much tech is too much tech? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of mapping identified needs to that tech.
I actually have two kind of fundamental approaches that I follow. Let's go back in time a little bit and understand how Salesforce became successful, right? Salesforce built its infrastructure, and all of a sudden they needed to scale and add more tools, and they were about to invest millions and millions of dollars into doing just that. until their biggest shareholder, Steve Jobs, came and said, hey, I'm having so much success with this app store. That's what you should do. And we went from having platform solutions to point-based solutions. One of the worst things to ever happen. And so what I wind up doing is I come at it from a perspective of, okay, is that client using the product of a company or just a product, right? Because that difference really, really matters. Because if most companies are using platforms at some point, be it marketing automation or CDP or whatever, CRM, and they wind up having so much duplication, and there are countless statistics. If you look at the Martech map, the landscape, that Ritson put out, not Ritson. Anyway, thank you. Yes. Sorry, man. I love you. You're my hero. I just forgot your name for a second. It's out of hand, and it's so totally unnecessary. And the best example I see of it is like, okay, I sign on WordPress. I'm using HubSpot, doesn't matter which one. And I just signed up with Gravity Forms, and I also use JotForm. And I'm going, what the heck are you doing? First of all, it's a logistical and unsustainable nightmare, but you're also hurting your ability to leverage data real time to enhance conversion rates, right? So it's that kind of a thing. So it brings me to my second point. People are thinking about what they want for them based on what other people are doing, what G2 says. None of that stuff matters. What do your customers need to feel happy and content, right? What do they need to stay engaged with your brand, and not move over to one of your competitors? Because for them to move on to one of your competitors is an investment of time they likely don't have. So you must have given them one heck of a reason to stop using your service. And no company is immune to it. Disney had this promotion they ran a little while ago about you could win a free trip for your family to Disneyland. When everybody got to the forum, it didn't work because there was a browser conflict between the form that they embedded and the actual browsers. Ridiculous. And not even just because it's Disney, and no one's immune to these types of things happening, but because it's wholly avoidable. Yeah. You don't need duplicative tools. That has to be, and so it comes down to budget and ROI, not just of how much those tools cost, but how much they cost to maintain. My father always taught me, it's not whether you could afford the car, it's whether you could afford to maintain the car that you really need to think about. And that sticks with me here. So how much tech is too much tech? For me, I want to use as close to one piece of tech as absolutely possible. Not likely realistic, but that's my mission. So unless my tool doesn't offer it, I'm going to look at it. Does it integrate naturally with my HubSpot or my ActiveCampaign? Because if it doesn't, I don't have a development team. So that's not going to help me at all. I could pay for a freelancer to come in and set up the connection, but I'll be damned if I'm going to have custom web services developed for this one integration, right? So it's just thinking things through common sense, logically, and saying, is the feature truly going to be a benefit to both me and to my customers? I say that in the wrong order, to my customers and to me. But that really is, to me, how you determine it. And then the last piece of it is somewhat related, which is, don't try to put the cart before the horse. People in their homes, if they get estimates, they make sure certain things are ready before they, have someone paint the house. They'll take the stuff off the walls, but not with this stuff, not with tech. They all have to get the next toy that's available. Everybody wants a chatbot. Forget the fact that they don't have any data and they have no repositories of information indexed anywhere. They're going to start paying for the chatbot tool, And it'll be 18 months before they just give up on it because they didn't have time to finish the repository. You don't need a chatbot. I mean, does it help? Not if it's not right. So don't do it.
Yeah. Well, that chatbot's a great example of garbage in, garbage out, right? Like you have to, it's not just a monetary investment. I think it is a key thing here. You talk about the time, you talk about the money, but it's your time, right? So
It's operational.
You know, we help people, you know, go, hey, changing ESPs even for the right reasons is a pain. It's an absolute pain in the ass, right?
Oh, it's awful.
But and so when you get to that point, you go, the first question out of my mouth, and that always is, one, why? What are the issues that you're running into, and can you solve it with your current platform? And then number two, and I may have gotten my letters and numbers mixed up here, but who's gonna be the end user, right? Because if you have a team, like we mentioned, Salesforce Marketing Cloud, the last brand side job I had, they were on Marketing Cloud, and I went, please have a dev team, because you have to have a dev team to run that platform. It's a great platform, but it's very resource intensive.
Exactly right. Absolutely.
It's very resource intensive. If you are the owner of a small business and you're running email yourself, my recommendation to you will be entirely different than if you're running a mid-sized to small enterprise brand with real dev resources and everything, right? So you got to match it up to who's doing it, who has the time for it, how easy is it, and then get realistic in terms of your output, right? I mean, we talk about personalization all day. So the good and bad thing about email is that just sending out an email works.
It does, and unfortunately makes the arguments that we have a little harder to say, but it will get better. We made money on it. I know, but we'd make more money if, we did.
Right. Yeah. The story of our lives.
Absolutely.
Let's talk, we talk in tech here. It's been around for 5 years, believe it or not, but AMP for email. The big thing from Google, we had Nick Einstein from NetCore Cloud on the show talking about it a few weeks ago. Have you done any work with AMP? What have you seen there? Is the juice worth the squeeze? I mean, there's a lot of complexity to it that can be glossed over a little bit. So we'd love to know your thoughts on that.
My favorite tool, the only tool that I universally love for every client, is Stripo. I'm not endorsed by them, so I'm not saying that because I'm going to get a kickback. It's because I genuinely mean it. As somebody who works on emails, it's by far the best tool that exists, and they have a lot of AMP functionality. Dimitri, who's the brain of Stripo, he and I have had discussions about AMP, and for me, I don't think it's worth it. And there are very few black and white answers, especially in our world, but I just don't see the point from a business perspective to do it. I don't get it. There's a lot of reasons that I'm happy to get into, but just to answer your question, yes, I've used it, but no, I don't go out of my way to.
So it sounds like one of those, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. I'm sure you've got a million of them, Brian. I'm going to ask maybe for just your one or two of your absolute favorites. Can you give us some success stories on the impact of personalization? Good or bad?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it'd have to be good if there were success stories, but.
Well, in my experience, the most successful personalization campaigns are those that are multi-channel. I refuse to call it omni-channel. It just confuses people. Omni means one. Okay. So let's just be clear. Even though you might describe them on paper as omni-channel campaigns, they're multi-channel because they were sent via more than one channel, period. End of discussion. Talk about lexicon. Anyway.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah. It doesn't keep me up at night. I worked on a project with Disney World, which was, to this day, my favorite project I ever did. And what it was, you would let's position where we were in the world at the time I did this, because that's important. This was probably around 2007. So, put that in your mind when you think of, yeah, but you could have just done this. No, not in 2007, I couldn't, right? So when people would call, which by the way, is still the preferred way for people to make reservations for Disney, because they go out of their way to make it a very confusing experience if you've never done it before. And you could buy a Hyundai for the price. So you want to get it right. You go to call and you make the reservation. And when you're making the reservation, again, talking about not Big Brother, they're asking you, who's in your family? Well, we have 2 boys. And because it's Disney, people will give out information like you don't know. It's amazing. You'd be hesitant to do it with most companies. With Disney, you're excited to, because maybe Mickey Mouse will know about it. I mean, it's an incredible thing. And what we did, though, is we would send the purchase confirmation after they booked the vacation. And in it, we would invite families to click through to create their own map. Not create their own map, but create their own journey through the parks. I want to go to this ride, I want to go here, and with this. And what they didn't know was that 3 to 4 weeks later in the mail, they were going to get and it was made out of like cotton paper. It was amazing. A printout of the park with their navigation written on it and the kids' names and everything. And
that's cool.
But what made it so great from a business perspective is you're going to pass this store, stop there for 20% off. You probably could use that 20% off at any store, but the fact that you're passing that store, you drove relevance to that person at that exact moment. And on the bottom of the map, and this is true if you've ever booked a Disney vacation, you know it. You need to book reservations for dining ahead of time. You do. You're not going to get a place. So on the bottom, it had like recommendations for restaurants based on the resort you stayed in. And that is personalization at its height, in my opinion. But I also don't know that it would be possible with most companies, because you have to be willing to give a lot of the information out, a lot of the answers out,
Yeah. I have a similar example, one of my favorites, and I've seen a lot. I consider myself that old jaded guy, so I was really impressed by this one. It was done by Bowden, a clothing retailer in the UK. And I want to say this was maybe between 6 and 8 years ago. They had used movable ink to do this amazing love letter for their win-back audience. And there were some very cool dynamic mergings in there. So there was even some very cool dynamic computations in there as well. So it started off, hi, first name. Johnny started Bowden X number of days ago, and that was a running computation that they would show. Since that time, you've ordered, or excuse me, and your very first order was X, and they merged in the actual product that represented their first purchase. Then X number of products or packages that soon showed up on your doorstep over the next Y number of months. So all of these again being dynamic. The last item you ordered was this, polka dot whatever, merging that in, and it's now been Z number of days since you've received that. And so it was just this beautiful history in retrospect of their entire relationship. And then it ended with, hey, we miss you. We'd love to see you back. Here's 20% off on your next order. But that, I want to say, resulted in I might be butchering the number, something like an 800% lift in conversions from their win-back audience. Was one of the most brilliantly put together and well executed and effective and impactful uses of personalization.
You know what I think the common thread between both of our examples, I think, is using personalization in the name of service. It's huge.
To me, it's also making the story about the customer, not about the company and not about the product, right? Yeah. This is my story.
What they need to know and why and when.
My story, I think, is key because, I think about, and it's about shareability as well. When people are going to talk about that, like, look at this map, let me show you, right? With Disney, right? Like there's that 2007 shareability, but still it's that shareability. And like, you're talking about that example of Bowden, and it's like, hey, look, it's this and that, and it's kind of cool. And let me show you how they did this. I think about Spotify Wrapped every year. People get a huge rise out of that, and that's email, that's social, that's the app. It's shareable, and you get exposed and go, oh crap, I really did listen to that song 35 times this past year. That's probably only 35 times. Wow, I thought I listened to that all the time. Yeah. And so it's interesting. Those are the types of things that you have the data on hand, right? I mean, Spotify, if you think they're not collecting data on you,
Oh,
come
please.
on, you are the
Yeah.
product, right?
But you
I
know
mean,
what? I
yeah,
think what's huge is to really respect the fact that email is the most intimate form of communication. When we talk
yep,
about mass marketing, we go to websites, we go and read blogs, we go to YouTube, we receive email. So
yep.
inherent to that, there is a certain level of intimacy you might get away with in email that you might not elsewhere. But make that about the engagement you have with the user, where they're not only not surprised you're including it, they're happy you're including it because holy crap, I did forget to buy more batteries. I do need them. Like that. It's not complicated. You know what I mean?
On the flip side, you have the guy who posted Amazon, I needed one toilet seat. I don't need more toilet seats. Stop sending me emails about toilet seats.
Exactly.
So it's there's that give and take that is just so natural with personalization, that risk reward, right? Like, okay, I got one toilet seat. Maybe think about, I mean, Amazon, I mean, just the sheer number of SKUs, and each of those, if you think about it, has its own life cycle, right? So
Yeah.
if you're doing true replenishment, things like that, if some guy's breaking a toilet seat every 10 days, you might want to send him an email about therapy, not necessarily about
Very
more
true.
toilet seats. But I'm just saying, like, I think about like Overstock, or, some of those where they have millions and millions of SKUs, and I go, that's just insane, right? That's just crazy.
The difference, though, is that they are indexing them for search on their site search, and also for filtering. So you do know it's an electronic. You do know that it's not so many steps away from it, but it's that all their efforts are on AMP and not on improving the database so they could send its AA batteries. And to me, that's a perfect example of why are you messing with something that only works with one email client? And by the way, the worst part about AMP beyond anything is you can't get very many analytics from it. If you want zero-party data, you need to bring somebody to a page. Why are you keeping them in the inbox? We've spent our entire careers focused on getting people the heck out of the inbox to a page. Why do you want them in the inbox? Get them out of there. They can't buy anything there. So get them out. I could go off on AMP for like an hour. I just don't get it. Sorry to deviate.
No, that get them out of the inbox is a mantra I repeat as well, Brian. I was so thrilled to hear you say that. It's yes, validation, right?
Yes.
Yeah, just get him out of the email. I've been saying that for years too. Like, well, they shouldn't read it. I don't care if they read it or not. If they click through,
yeah, exactly.
and then they go order or do whatever we want them to do. Like, I don't care how long they spend in the email if they do what we want them to do.
They say
Unless
that's a great subject line.
Product,
yeah.
Unless the email is the product, move them out as quick as possible.
Yeah. Yep.
We had a great subject line. Our open rates were huge. Fantastic. You had the lowest click rate I've ever seen on an email.
Or to your point, the Disney example you mentioned earlier, where it's like, wow, we got this amazing click-through rate. Well, no conversions. Well, then the site's broken. The form's broken.
I am fundamentally against awareness as a tool of marketing. I can't stand when people use that word in front of me. But if somebody wants to use that word outside of the email channel, I go, whatever, that's your problem. But don't tell me emails for awareness. First of all, it would destroy deliverability. Second of all, it defeats the entire purpose of email, right? People say, well, I don't really care if they read my email. I just want them to see a reference to my company in their inbox. What are you talking about?
You're doing it wrong.
I mean, there is value to being there, but that shouldn't be the only value you're deriving from it.
Right, exactly.
It's the first step, not the end game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Man, we could go on for another hour, but
I'm ready.
I think, yeah, I think our audience would be like, all right, an hour is enough. Come on, Brian. Where can people find out more about you and about Labrador?
Well, they could go to my website, labradorconnect.com. It's an awful site. I have not had any reason to update it because, most of every client I have actually is referred to me by somebody, which is a pleasure. LinkedIn, looking up my name, Brian Riback, is a great channel too, to find me, or, I'm always in New Jersey, so come to the shore or something and we'll hang out. But I love engaging with people, be it a potential sale or not. just being a voice that could try to talk them out of the bad ideas everyone else is talking them into. I love it. And certainly working with agencies that bring me in and say, before we do our work, you got to talk to Brian. That seems to be the trend. So,
you gotta come in and call the baby ugly first, which we like to do as well. We like to call it. We don't like to call the baby ugly, but we will call the baby ugly. Let's put it that way.
It's not a joyful thing. We're just not afraid to do it.
No. Well, thank you for coming on the show, Brian, and thanks to you, our listeners and watchers, for tuning in. Check us out, inboxarmy.com. Till next time, be safe and be well.
thanks.
Cheers. Cheers all.